Obese and auctioned for a mere $2, her value reduced to pocket change by those who should have protected her. But fate works in mysterious ways, and the mountain man saw something in her that no one else could. A future worth fighting. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The air in Pine Hollow clung heavy, thick with the scent of wood smoke, and something unspoken. The dread that came with the town's harvest fair. The autumn leaves rustled beneath anxious feet as townsfolk gathered at the fairgrounds, their faces a mixture of shame and morbid curiosity. No one spoke of the heritage ceremony in daylight hours, but as dusk fell, whispers began to circulate through the crowd. Mary Johnson felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited behind the makeshift stage. At 16, she towered over the other girls, her body a constant source of ridicule in the small West Virginia town. Her patched plaid dress strained against her frame, the fabric worn thin from too many washings. She kept her eyes fixed on the dusty ground, unable to meet the gazes that burned into her skin. Next up, the announcer's voice boomed. Mary Johnson. Her legs trembled as she climbed the rickety wooden steps. The stage creaked beneath her weight, eliciting snickers from the audience. Mary's fingers brushed against the folded paper in her pocket, the release form with her mother's signature scrawled across the bottom. The document felt like a hot coal against her thigh, a tangible symbol of betrayal. "Who'll start the bidding for this fine young lady?" the announcer called, his voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "Remember, folks, all proceeds go to the town's winter festival fund." Silence fell across the crowd. Mary's cheeks burned with humiliation as seconds stretched into an eternity. "I'll give you 0, someone finally called out, triggering a wave of laughter. "A quarter," another voice added. "I'd trade a slice of my wife's apple pie, but that'd be overpaying," a man in the front row jeered, causing the audience to erupt in cruel laughter. Mary's vision blurred with unshed tears. She'd known this would happen, had begged her mother not to sign the form, but with bills piling up and the electricity already shut off, her mother had insisted the heritage ceremony was just harmless tradition. The mockery continued, each bid more humiliating than the last. Mary focused on her breathing, counting the seconds until she could escape this nightmare and return to the shadows of her existence. Then from the back of the crowd, a gravelly voice cut through the mockery like a knife through cloth. $2. The laughter died instantly. Heads turned toward the source of the bid, and the crowd parted like water to reveal a tall figure standing in the shadows. $2, John Davis called from the back, his voice cutting through the mocking laughter like a knife through butter. The crowd fell silent, heads turning toward the source of the interruption. There he stood, a tall figure silhouetted against the fading sunset, his broad shoulders and wild beard unmistakable even from a distance. The hermit from the mountain had spoken. Whispers rippled through the gathering. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions in hushed tones. Everyone in Pine Hollow knew of John, though few had ever exchanged words with him. His rare appearances in town were treated like sightings of some mythical creature, something to be discussed in hushed tones over coffee at the local diner. Mary Johnson stood frozen on the rickety stage, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She'd expected the mockery, the cruel jokes about her weight, but not this unexpected turn. The mountain man approached the auction table with deliberate steps, his weathered boots leaving imprints in the dusty fairground. "I said $2, he repeated, pulling 2 crumpled bills from the pocket of his worn flannel shirt. The auctioneer, a balding man with tobacco-stained fingers, hesitated before taking the money. No one dared to outbid John. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, unable to meet Mary's eyes. "To Miss Davis." The hermit placed the money on the table with a calloused hand. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't show any emotion at all. His eyes, deep-set and intensely blue, briefly met Mary's before he nodded toward the path leading away from the fairgrounds. "Come," he said simply. Mary clutched her small bag of belongings, her heart hammering against her ribs. Was this better or worse than the humiliation of standing on stage? She had no idea what awaited her up on that mountain. Stories about John Davis ranged from harmless eccentric to dangerous recluse. As she stepped down from the stage, she heard her mother's voice from somewhere in the crowd, not calling her back, not protesting, just commenting to someone nearby about the unexpected price. $2 whole, more than she'd expected for her unwanted daughter. The crowd parted as John walked away, his steps steady and unhurried. He never once looked back to see if Mary followed. The teenager trailed behind him, feeling the weight of every stare burning into her back. Snickers faded into uncomfortable murmurs as they left the harvest fair behind. Mary hugged herself tightly, shame and confusion battling within her chest. What would become of her now? The mountain loomed ahead, dark and forbidding against the twilight sky, promising either sanctuary or something far worse. Mary Johnson trudged behind John Davis, her lungs burning with each step up the mountain. The stories in Pine Hollow had painted him as a wild hermit living in some decrepit shack, but as they climbed higher through thorny brambles and over jagged stones, she realized how wrong those whispers had been. "Almost there," John muttered, the first words he'd spoken since they'd left the auction stage. When they finally crested the ridge, Mary gasped despite herself. Before them stood not a ramshackle cabin, but a formidable structure that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. The fortress was masterfully crafted from massive timber beams and local stone, its windows small but strategically placed, its roof sturdy against the West Virginia winds. It was hidden from the valley below, imposing in its solitude, and somehow as wild as the mountain that embraced. John pushed open the heavy wooden door and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the air was surprisingly warm. No electric lights illuminated the space, only the golden glow of oil lamps and the crackling fire in a stone hearth. Mary noticed immediately there were no mirrors anywhere, no reflective surfaces to remind her of the body that had been mocked and sold for $2. The hermit moved with surprising grace for such a large man, ladling something from a pot hanging over the fire. "Eat," he said, handing her a wooden bowl filled with steaming stew. The rich aroma of unfamiliar herbs and root vegetables filled her nostrils. Mary stared at the food suspiciously, her stomach growling despite her fear. "It's not poisoned," John said, his voice softer than before. "Just herbs from the mountainside. Good for strength." She took a hesitant spoonful, the flavors strange but not unpleasant. While she ate, he rummaged through a cedar chest and pulled out clothing: thick wool pants, a heavy sweater, sturdy sock. "These will fit better than that dress," he said, placing the garments beside her. They smelled of pine resin and mountain air. Mary clutched her thin plaid dress defensively. "I don't need your charity." John looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes neither pitying nor cruel. "You'll never get lighter," he said quietly, "if you keep trying to vanish." The words struck her like a physical blow. She'd spent years trying to disappear, to shrink herself, to become invisible to the taunts and stares. Somehow this stranger had seen straight through her in ways her own mother never had. Mary turned away, unable to meet his gaze, unsure if she should feel violated or understood. Mary Johnson curled into herself on the rough cot, her tears soaking through the thin pillow night after night. "You'll never get lighter if you keep trying to vanish." His words burned in her mind, salt in wounds already raw from the auction. She pulled the scratchy woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders, as if she could disappear beneath it. The 16-year-old's muscles screamed from the steep climb up the mountain. Every inch of her body ached. Her calves, her back, her lungs, but nothing compared to the ache in her chest. The laughter from the harvest fair still echoed in her ears. The memory of standing on that rickety stage while people bid pennies for her made her stomach turn. John Davis gave her space those first few days, leaving bowls of food outside the small room where she had barricaded herself. Sometimes she heard him moving about the timber fortress, his footsteps steady and unhurried. He never pushed, never demanded, just waited. On the fourth morning he knocked once before entering. "Time to work," he said simply, his weathered face revealing nothing. Mary glared at him through puffy eyes. "I'm not your slave." "No," the mountain man agreed. "You're not anyone's anything." But the water won't carry itself. That first day she struggled with the wooden buckets, spilling half their contents as she navigated the rocky path from the spring. Her hands blistered, unused to such labor. The second day he sent her to gather bark and berries, explaining which ones were medicinal, which were poisonous. By the third day, she was hauling stones for the fire ring, each one testing her strength. "I hate you," she muttered on the seventh day, sweat dripping down her face as she stacked firewood. John merely nodded. "That's your right." But something was happening that Mary couldn't explain. With each task, each challenge, the mountain seemed to be reshaping her. The air up here was different, cleaner, sharper. It filled her lungs and cleared her head. The physical labor, though brutal at first, began to feel like a release. The weakness that had defined her in Pine Hollow, the weakness that had made her mother sign that release form, was being pressed out of her bones. At night, exhausted, she still cried. But the tears were changing, becoming something else, not just sorrow, not just shame, but determination. In the silence of the mountain fortress, far from the cruel eyes of the town below, Mary Johnson was beginning to feel the first stirrings of strength. Mary Johnson found herself surrendering to the mountain's harsh lessons. Each morning her muscles screamed as she hauled water up the steep trails John Davis had shown her. The frigid West Virginia wind whipped across her face, turning her cheeks raw and red. Her hands, once soft and unused to labor, grew calloused from gathering firewood and scrubbing clothes against rough stones in the creek. But something unexpected was happening. As weeks passed, Mary noticed changes in her body that went beyond the pain. Her lungs expanded more fully with each breath of pine-scented air. Her legs, once weak and unsteady, now carried her confidently across rocky terrain. The extra weight that had made her a target for ridicule in Pine Hollow began to redistribute as muscle formed beneath. "Your body is finding its purpose," John remarked one evening, noticing how she no longer struggled with the water buckets. He didn't praise or criticize, just observed with that same steady gaze that revealed nothing of his true thoughts. At dusk, when her chores were complete, Mary found herself drawn to a rocky outcrop near the timber fortress. She would sit in silence, watching deer emerge from the shadows to drink from a small spring. In these quiet moments, with the valley of Pine Hollow spread out below like a distant memory, she felt something close to peace. Yet questions circled her mind like hungry ravens. Why had this mountain hermit paid $2 for her at that humiliating auction? What did he want from her? The wooden figures hidden beneath the bearskin rug haunted her thoughts. Were they memorials or warnings? "You're getting stronger," John told her one morning as she split kindling without complaint. "The mountain doesn't care what you look like or where you came from. It only respects those who respect it." Mary studied his weathered face, searching for clues. Was he a predator who had purchased her for sinister reasons, or something else entirely? The isolation that had initially terrified her now felt strangely protective, shielding her from the cruelty she'd known in town. That night, as she lay on her cot, listening to the wind howl through the pines, Mary realized something that both comforted and frightened her. For the first time in her 16 years, she was becoming visible to herself, rather than seeing herself through others' judgmental eyes. The mountain was remaking her, but into what, she couldn't yet say. Mary's arms ached as she swept the stone floor of John Davis's mountain fortress. After 3 weeks of hauling water and gathering firewood, her body had begun to change. Her movements were more deliberate now, her breathing steadier as she worked through the afternoon chores. The bearskin rug near the hearth had always seemed oddly placed. As Mary pushed it aside to sweep underneath, her broom caught on something, a metal ring embedded in the floor. Her heart quickened. A trapdoor. She glanced toward the window. John had left hours ago to check his traps and wouldn't return until dusk. Curiosity overwhelmed caution as she set her broom aside and pulled at the heavy iron ring. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow wooden ladder descending into darkness. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice swallowed by the shadows below. No answer. Mary lowered herself carefully, each rung groaning under her weight. The air grew cooler as she descended, carrying the rich scent of cedar that reminded her of her grandmother's hope chest. At the bottom, she fumbled along the wall until her fingers found a box of matches. The small flame illuminated a space no larger than a pantry. Mary gasped. Dozens of wooden figures lined the walls on simple shelves, all carved in the shapes of girls. Some stood tall and proud, others hunched and fragile. Each one bore distinctive features: braided hair, round cheeks, slender limbs, and beneath every figure, A name had been carefully etched into the wood. Sarah, she whispered, reading the nearest one. Emma, Lily, Rebecca. The collection stretched around the entire room. Some carvings looked weathered and old, others freshly polished. Mary's fingers trembled as she touched a figure of a girl with her arms wrapped protectively around herself. What was this place? A shrine, a memorial, or something more sinister? The hermit's reputation in Pine Hollow suddenly seemed justified. The strange man who took girls from the auction, how many had there been before her? Mary backed toward the ladder, nearly stumbling in her haste. Her mind raced with horrific possibilities. Was she meant to be another wooden figure, preserved in this underground chamber? Had the others escaped, or were they buried somewhere on this mount? The match burned down to her fingertips, and she dropped it with a hiss of pain. In the renewed darkness, the wooden faces seemed to watch her, their silent stories pressing against her like physical weight. She climbed back up, heart hammering against her ribs, and carefully replaced the bearskin rug. Tonight she would demand answers from John. If he refused, she would find her own way down the mountain, before she became just another carving with a name. Mary Johnson stood in the center of the cabin, her hands trembling as she clutched one of the wooden figures. The firelight cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes despite her fear. "Who are they?" she demanded, voice cracking. "All those girls carved in wood. What did you do to them?" John Davis looked up from his place by the hearth, his weathered face unreadable in the dim light. His jaw tightened, and something dark passed behind his eyes, not anger, but a pain so deep it seemed to physically wound him. He turned away, refusing to meet her gaze. "Put it back," he said quietly. "Some things aren't meant for explaining." "I deserve to know," Mary insisted, stepping closer. "Am I going to end up as another wooden figure hidden beneath your floor?" The mountain man remained silent, methodically stoking the fire, as if she hadn't spoken. The walls of the timber fortress suddenly felt like a prison to Mary, the isolation no longer peaceful, but threatening. That night, sleep evaded her. She lay on her cot, listening to John's heavy breathing from across the room, her mind racing with horrific possibilities. What if the rumors in Pine Hollow were true? What if he was collecting girls, not saving them? When morning came, Mary began taking inventory of her surroundings with new eyes. She counted the cans of beans stacked in the corner. 14. Enough to sustain her for a journey back to civilization if she rationed carefully. She studied the crude map John had sketched on a piece of bark, memorizing the trails that led down the mountain. During her daily chores, she began squirreling away supplies: a small knife, matches wrapped in waxed paper, a water flask. She hid them beneath her cot, calculating how many days it would take to reach the nearest town. The West Virginia wilderness was unforgiving, but staying felt increasingly dangerous. 3 days after discovering the hidden room, Mary had finalized her escape plan. She would leave at dawn, when the mountain fog would provide cover. She packed her meager belongings into a small bundle and lay awake, waiting for first light, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might wake John. But before the sun could rise, a commotion erupted outside. Something crashed through the underbrush. Not an animal, but something larger, more desperate. Mary bolted upright as John grabbed his rifle and moved toward the door. A voice called out, young, male, terrified, followed by more crashing through the forest. John threw open the door, weapon raised, as Mary peered over his shoulder into the darkness, her escape momentarily forgotten in the face of this new mystery. The stillness of the mountain night shattered like glass. Mary had just finished sorting pine needles for the bedding when she heard it, a crashing through the underbrush, desperate and frantic. She froze, clutching a handful of needles to her chest. Through the trees stumbled a boy no older than 17. His clothes hung in tatters, face streaked with dirt and blood. One leg dragged behind him, leaving a trail of broken twigs and disturbed earth. When he saw Mary standing in the clearing, he recoiled like a wounded animal. "Please," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "Don't tell him you saw me." Mary approached cautiously, hands raised to show she meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. Who's after you?" The boy's eyes darted wildly, scanning the tree line. Mr. Harmon bought me at last year's auction, said I'd work off my price. His voice cracked. Never enough, never finished paying. Michael Brown, he added after catching his breath. That's my name. Been running 3 days now. Mary felt ice spread through her veins. Another auction victim. Another soul sold like cattle at the harvest fair. Without hesitation, she helped Michael to his feet and guided him toward John Davis's fortress. John might be back any minute, she whispered, leading him up the rough-hewn stairs to the loft. Stay quiet. The boy collapsed onto the pile of blankets, his body trembling uncontrollably. Mary brought him water in a wooden cup and some dried meat from their stores. Michael devoured it, tears streaming down his dirt-stained face. They hunt you, he said between bites, like deer, for fun. If they catch you trying to escape. He showed her the marks on his back, evidence of punishment that made Mary's stomach turn. She recognized the hollow look in his eyes, the shame that clung to him like a second skin. It was the same shame she'd carried up this mountain, the same worthlessness that had followed her from Pine Hollow. You're safe here, Mary promised, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. What would John do when he returned? Would he protect Michael or send him back? As Michael drifted into an exhausted sleep, Mary kept watch by the small window. She saw herself reflected in this stranger, another discarded child, another life deemed worth only pocket change. Her hands balled into fists. For the first time since arriving on the mountain, Mary felt something beyond her own pain, a fierce, protective anger that burned hotter than fear. Tomorrow would bring consequences, but tonight she would stand guard. No one would hurt this boy again. Not while she drew breath. Mary woke before dawn, anxiety gnawing at her stomach. She'd hidden Michael Brown in the loft. A decision that could enrage John Davis. Every creak of the wooden fortress made her flinch, imagining the mountain man's fury when he discovered her deception. The inevitable moment came sooner than expected. John's heavy footsteps echoed across the main room, followed by a pause and then the sound of the ladder creaking. Mary rushed from her cot, heart pounding against her ribs. "Wait," she called out. But it was too late. John stood at the top of the ladder, staring at the injured boy who cowered against the far wall. Michael's eyes were wide with terror, his legs still crusted with dried blood from his desperate escape through the wilderness. Mary braced herself for an explosion of anger, for accusations of betrayal. She positioned herself between them, ready to defend the frightened teenager who reminded her so much of herself. But John Davis surprised her. Without a word, he descended the ladder and returned moments later with a cloth-wrapped bundle. The mountain man knelt beside Michael, his weathered face unreadable, as he offered a chunk of bread and uncovered a clean bandage. "This needs cleaning," John said quietly, gesturing to the boy's wounded leg. "Infection sets in fast up here." Michael looked to Mary for reassurance, his trembling hands accepting the food. She nodded, equally confused by this unexpected gentleness. As John tended to the wound with practiced movements, Mary watched his face. The same hands that had forced her to carry water up steep trails now worked with surprising tenderness. "Everyone deserves shelter," John murmured, not meeting Mary's questioning gaze. He wrapped the bandage methodically around Michael's leg. "The mountain doesn't care who you are when the storm comes." The contradiction unsettled her deeply. Was this the same man who had purchased her at the harvest fair? The hermit who kept wooden figures of girls hidden beneath the floor? His actions painted him as both savior and something else entirely, something she couldn't yet define. When John finished, he stood and pointed to a shelf of canned goods. "He'll need strength to heal. There's enough for all of us." Mary watched him descend the ladder, questions swirling in her mind. The eremita who terrified Pine Hollow's residents had just shown compassion to a stranger. The man who demanded back-breaking work from her now offered food and medicine freely. She looked at Michael, who had already devoured the bread, and wondered what other contradictions this mountain held, and what secrets John Davis still kept buried beneath his silent exterior. Down in Pine Hollow, the autumn chill carried whispers through town. Councilwoman Susan Martin sat in her modest office, surrounded by stacks of paper and 3 empty coffee cups. Her niece's disappearance 2 months ago had ignited something fierce within her, a determination that bordered on obsession. The Harvest Fair auction has been a tradition for 75 years, Mayor Wilson insisted when Susan confronted him at the town hall. It's symbolic, just good fun. Susan Martin wasn't convinced. My niece vanished after last year's ceremony, she replied, sliding a folder across his desk. And she's not the only one. I've documented 17 cases of young people who disappeared after being sold at your good fun tradition. The investigation gained momentum when Susan contacted a journalist from the regional newspaper. Within days, Pine Hollow found itself under unwelcome scrutiny. Residents who had participated in the auctions for years suddenly claimed they'd never taken it seriously, while others defended the practice as harmless heritage. It's just theater, one elderly shopkeeper told reporter. Nobody actually owns anybody. But Susan had uncovered signed release forms, money changing hands, and disturbing accounts from former participants. Most troubling were the whispers about John Davis, the mountain hermit who had purchased Mary Johnson. He takes them, a woman confided to Susan in the back booth of the local diner. Been doing it for years. Some say he's saving them, others say she didn't finish the sentence. The mountain man's reputation was a patchwork of contradictions. Some described him as a predator, others as a guardian angel. A retired teacher recalled how John had appeared at the auction 15 years ago, paying $3 for a boy who'd been beaten black and blue by his stepfather. The boy was never seen in Pine Hollow again, but postcards arrived years later from a military academy 3 states away. Susan's investigation threatened to unravel decades of silence. The mayor began receiving angry calls from prominent families worried about exposure. The town's attorney warned Susan about defamation lawsuits. Anonymous threats appeared on her car windshield. Still, she persisted. When she discovered that Mary Johnson's mother had received $200 from the mayor's discretionary fund the day after signing the release form, Susan knew she'd found the thread that could unravel everything. This stops now, she announced at the emergency council meeting, or I take everything I've found to the federal authorities. The room fell silent. In that moment, everyone understood that Pine Hollow's darkest tradition was finally facing the light of day, and John Davis's name hung in the balance. Monster or martyr, the truth remained to be seen. Mary paced the wooden floor of the fortress, her footsteps echoing through the silence. The carved figures haunted her thoughts. With each passing hour, her unease grew until she could bear it no longer. I need to know the truth, she demanded, cornering John Davis as he returned from gathering firewood. Those wooden girls in the hidden room, who are they? What happened to them? Her voice trembled, but her stance was firm, arms crossed protectively over her chest. The mountain man set down his bundle with a sigh. His weathered face seemed to age before her eyes, as he lowered himself onto a rough-hewn stool. For a long moment he stared into the dying embers of the fire. I wondered when you'd ask again, he said finally. Sit down, Mary. She hesitated, then perched on the edge of a chair, ready to bolt if necessary. John rubbed his calloused hands together, eyes distant. 23 years ago, I found a girl half dead in these woods. Beaten, starved, Pine Hollow's dirty secret. She'd been sold. Just like you. His voice grew softer. I helped her heal, taught her to survive. When she left, I carved her figure so I wouldn't forget. Mary's breath caught. And the others? Each one has a story, some from the auctions, others running from homes, worse than the wilderness. He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. Some stayed weeks, others years. They all left eventually, college scholarships, jobs in other states, new lives. The carvings are my way of honoring their strength. Why didn't you tell me this before? Mary whispered. Would you have believed me? John asked simply. Or would you have seen a madman collecting trophies? The truth settled between them like dust motes in sunlight. Mary thought of Michael Brown hiding in the loft, of Councilwoman Susan Martin fighting in the valley below, of her own mother who had signed her away for pocket change. Show me, she said suddenly. John led her back to the trapdoor. This time, as they descended, Mary saw the room differently, not as a shrine to captivity, but as a memorial to survival. Each wooden face told a story of transformation. This one, John said, pointing to a figure with a determined expression, runs a shelter in Kentucky now. This one, he indicated another, became a lawyer. Mary ran her fingers over the smooth wooden cheeks, feeling the weight of shared experience. For the first time since arriving on the mountain, she felt something unexpected bloom in her chest. Not just trust, but understanding. They found their way, she murmured. John nodded. Just as you will find yours. Mary's anger dissolved like frost in morning sun. The revelation about John Davis's wooden figures transformed her understanding of the mountain man completely. These weren't trophies of captives as she had feared, but memorials, tributes to souls he had sheltered and helped find their way. She hesitated, fingers tracing the smooth grain of one carving. Could I make one of myself? Not how Pine Hollow saw me, but how I see myself now. John nodded, his weathered face softening. The wood doesn't lie, he said, selecting a cedar block from a shelf and placing it in her hands. Neither should you. The block felt warm against her palms, heavier than it looked. Mary studied its grain, the natural patterns suggesting contours she'd never noticed in herself. John showed her how to hold the carving knife, his calloused hands guiding hers with unexpected gentleness. Start with what you know, he instructed, demonstrating a simple cut. The rest will reveal itself. That evening, as snow began to drift past the fortress windows, Mary sat cross-legged before the hearth. The mountain's silence wrapped around her like a blanket. Michael Brown slept upstairs, his breathing finally steady after days of nightmares about his captors. Her first cuts were hesitant, awkward. Chips of cedar fell to the floor as she carved, each slice removing something she no longer needed. The rounded cheeks that had earned her cruel nicknames in Pine Hollow, the downcast eyes that had avoided confrontation, the hunched shoulders that had tried to make her invisible. Hours passed. Her fingers blistered, then calloused. The figure emerging from the wood wasn't perfect. One eye slightly larger than the other, the nose not quite symmetrical, but it possessed something her reflection in shop windows had always lacked. Strength. It's beautiful, John murmured, appearing so quietly she hadn't heard his approach. Mary studied her creation in the firelight. The wooden girl stood tall, chin lifted, eyes forward. Not thin, not conventionally pretty, but undeniably present, undeniably real. She looks brave, Mary whispered, surprised by the catch in her throat. She is, the mountain man replied simply. Mary placed her carving beside the others on the shelf, this new self joining the silent chorus of survivors. For the first time since being auctioned off for $2, she felt a sense of belonging bloom in her chest, not despite her differences, but because of them. Here, among the outcasts and the rescued, she had found her tribe. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing the path back to Pine Hollow, while inside Mary Johnson slept soundly, dreaming not of escape, but of possibility. The peace Mary Johnson had found on the mountain shattered like glass at dawn. The sun had barely crested the ridge when the crunch of boots on gravel jolted her awake. Through the cabin's small window she spotted them, 3 government officers in dark uniforms climbing the path, their clipboards and cameras catching the early light. John, she whispered urgently, shaking the mountain man from his sleep. Someone's coming. John Davis rose quickly, his weathered face calm despite the intrusion. Stay inside, he instructed, but it was too late. The officers were already knocking, their voices carrying official weight. Federal agents. Open up. Michael Brown appeared at the loft ladder, terror etched across his face. The boy who had escaped once before now looked ready to bolt again. Mary reached for his hand, steadying him as John opened the door. We have reports of 2 miners being held at this location, the lead agent stated, flashing credentials. Michael Brown was reported missing 6 months ago, and we've received information about Mary Johnson as well. The woman agent stepped forward, her eyes softening when she spotted Mary. Are you all right, honey? You're listed as unlawfully held. Mary wanted to scream that they didn't understand, that this mountain, this fortress of wood and stone, had become her sanctuary, not her prison. But the words stuck in her throat as she watched John's expression. I never forced anyone to stay, he said quietly. The male officer pulled out handcuffs. John Davis, you're under arrest for custodial interference and contributing to the delinquency of minors. Mary lunged forward. No, he saved me. It's all right, John interrupted, holding his wrists out without resistance. The metal clicked around them with cold finality. As the officers began documenting the cabin, photographing the sparse furnishings and taking notes, John leaned toward Mary. From his pocket he pulled a tattered leather journal, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. "Take this," he whispered, pressing it into her palm. His calloused fingers brushed against hers in a final gesture of connection. "The mountain gave you back to yourself. Remember that." Mary clutched the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face as they led John away. Michael stood beside her, trembling. Through the open door they watched the officers guide the mountain man down the path, the same path that had led Mary to freedom just months before. "What happens now?" Michael asked, his voice small against the vastness of their uncertainty. Mary stared at the journal in her hands, feeling the weight of everything John had taught her. "We tell the truth," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. All of the days following John Davis's arrest threw Mary Johnson's world into disarray. Government officials questioned her for hours about her time on the mountain, treating her with a mix of pity and suspicion that made her skin crawl. When they mentioned returning her to her mother, Mary's voice found a strength she hadn't known before. "I won't go back," she stated, arms crossed over her chest. "Not ever." Her resolve was tested the very next day when her mother arrived at the temporary shelter, flanked by a television crew. The woman who had signed her away for pocket change now dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, claiming she'd been misunderstood and manipulated by town tradition. The cameras captured her performance while Mary watched from behind a one-way mirror, her stomach turning at the spectacle. "My baby," her mother sobbed to the reporter. "I just want my baby back." It was Councilwoman Susan Martin who intervened, her tailored suit and confident stride a stark contrast to the chaos around them. The woman who had been investigating the auctions stepped between Mary and the social workers, discussing her fate. "This girl needs stability, not exploitation," Susan argued, her voice firm as she presented documents to the officials. "I'm petitioning for temporary guardianship while we sort this mess out legally." Mary studied the councilwoman's face, searching for ulterior motives but finding only determination. When Susan explained she had a spare bedroom in her house on the other side of Pine Hollow, Mary nodded her acceptance, relieved to have an advocate. The media frenzy exploded overnight. Local papers ran the headline, "Auctioned Girl Finds Strength in Wilderness," while national outlets picked up the story of the mountain hermit who rescued teenagers from an archaic ritual. Journalists descended on Pine Hollow like locusts, digging through town records and interviewing residents who suddenly claimed they'd always been uncomfortable with the tradition. Within days, strangers from neighboring counties arrived with handmade signs, marching through the town square demanding justice. Mary watched the coverage on Susan's television, feeling simultaneously exposed and vindicated, as the mayor called an emergency session. "The Harvest Fair auction has been permanently discontinued," he announced at a hastily organized press conference, sweat beading on his forehead. "This administration condemns any practice that undermines the dignity of our youth." Mary snorted at the screen. "Funny how they care now that cameras are rolling." Susan squeezed her shoulder. "Sometimes shame is the only language power understands," she said quietly. "But what matters is what comes next. Are you ready to tell your story in court?" Mary thought of John, of Michael, of the wooden figures beneath the cabin floor. She nodded slowly. "I'm ready." Mary Johnson stood before the Pine Hollow County Courthouse, her heart hammering against her ribs. The last 3 months had transformed her. Not just physically, but in ways that couldn't be measured. Her shoulders squared as she entered the imposing brick building, no longer the hunched girl who'd been auctioned off for $2. Inside the courtroom, her mother sat with a practiced look of concern, tissues clutched dramatically in her hand. Mary avoided her gaze, focusing instead on Susan Martin, whose steady presence had become her anchor through the legal storm. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Eleanor Winters entered the chamber. The hearing began with clinical formality, case numbers, legal terminology, and statements from social services. When Mary's mother took the stand, she wept about missing her daughter, claiming financial desperation had clouded her judgment. "I just want my baby back home where she belongs," she pleaded, eyes darting toward the news reporter sketching in the back row. When Mary's turn came, Susan squeezed her hand. The teenager approached the witness stand, her voice initially soft but gathering strength with each word. "Your Honor, I was sold like an unwanted pet at the harvest fair," she stated, her West Virginia accent more pronounced under stress. "My mother signed the release form knowing exactly what would happen. She's never once apologized, not to me." Mary described her time on the mountain, carefully explaining John Davis's role as protector rather than captor. "He taught me to stand on my own feet when everyone else wanted me to disappear." Judge Winters leaned forward. "And what do you want, Mary?" "I don't want to go back to a home where I was disposable," she answered, hands trembling despite her steady voice. "I want to finish school. I want to help other kids who've been thrown away." The courtroom fell silent as Susan presented her petition for guardianship, along with letters of support from community members and mental health professionals. She outlined a plan for Mary's education and counseling, emphasizing stability and healing. Outside, protesters held signs demanding justice for auctioned children. Their chants filtered through the courthouse windows, a tide of public opinion that couldn't be ignored. After 4 hours of testimony, Judge Winters delivered her ruling. The court finds that returning the minor to her biological mother would not serve her best interests. She peered over her glasses. Mary Johnson is granted the right to determine her own placement, with Councilwoman Susan Martin appointed as legal guardian until her 18th birthday. Mary exhaled, tears finally breaking free. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was the first day of a life that belonged truly to her. Mary Johnson didn't hesitate when the opportunity arose to create something meaningful from her painful past. With Councilwoman Susan Martin's unwavering support, she launched the Mountain Project, a wilderness retreat for at-risk girls nestled on the same ridge where she had discovered her own strength and resilience. "These girls need what I found here," Mary explained to potential donors, her voice steady with conviction. Not pity, but purpose. Susan leveraged her political connections to secure the initial funding, while Mary drafted plans to transform John's fortress into a sanctuary. The old wooden structure remained at the heart of the property, but they added simple cabins, a communal kitchen, and a workshop filled with carving tools. The first group arrived on a crisp autumn morning, 5 girls with downcast eyes and defensive postures that Mary recognized all too well. They climbed the mountain path in silence, some dragging their feet, others scanning for escape routes. Mary led them without pushing, understanding their awareness. "This mountain taught me how to stand tall," she told them, that first evening as they gathered around the fire ring John had built. "I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to show you how to find what's already inside you." Each girl received a block of cedar and simple carving tools. Mary demonstrated how to shape the wood, her hands moving with practiced confidence. "Your first project is to carve who you are now," she instructed. "Later, you'll carve who you're becoming." The ritual became the cornerstone of the Mountain Project. Every participant created a wooden figure that joined the growing collection on the stone walls. What had once been John's private memorial transformed into a living testament of healing and growth. Mary secured volunteers, therapists, wilderness guides, and artists who understood trauma without dwelling on it. They taught practical skills, fire building, tracking, identifying edible plants, and navigating by stars. The mountain became both classroom and therapist. On quiet evenings, Mary would sometimes open John's tattered journal, finding strength in his sketches and observations. Though he remained in legal limbo, his spirit infused every aspect of the retreat. The fortress that had once sheltered her now sheltered dozens. Girls who arrived with hunched shoulders left standing straight. Those who couldn't meet anyone's gaze learned to look the world in the eye. "This isn't charity," Mary would tell visitors who came to observe the program. "This is transformation." She would gesture toward the wooden figures lining the walls, each one a story, each one proof that even those discarded by society could reclaim their worth. The mountain that had once hidden her now revealed her purpose. Michael Brown found himself healing among the towering pines of the Mountain Project. The nightmares that once lacked him nightly had gradually subsided, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. During the day he helped build cabins and clear trails, but his evenings were consumed by a different mission, searching for his younger sister Emma. "She was only 12 when I ran," he confided to Mary one evening as they sat by the crackling fire. "I've tried every foster home in 3 counties. His voice cracked as he traced the outline of a small wooden figure he'd carved. A girl with braided hair, just as he remembered Emma. Mary Johnson placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll find her, Mike. Susan has connections at Child Services now." Down in Pine Hollow, Councilwoman Susan Martin was waging her own battle. The town council meetings had become battlegrounds where she faced the old guard men who had profited from the auction system for generations. They called her an outsider, despite her having lived there for 20 years. "You're destroying our heritage," Mayor Thompson had spat during the last meeting. Susan had stood firm, photographs of past auctions spread across the table. "This isn't heritage, it's exploitation." Her proposal to redirect town funds toward youth programs passed by a single vote, leaving half the council seething. Back at the retreat, Mary moved between groups of girls with natural authority. At 19, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that commanded respect. The mountain air had chiseled away her insecurities, leaving behind a young woman whose compassion was matched only by her resolve. "Remember, the mountain doesn't care who you were before," she told a newly arrived girl who huddled, trembling in oversized clothes. "It only matters who you choose to become." She demonstrated how to strike flint against steel, creating sparks that caught in the tinder. The girl's eyes widened as the flame took hold. That evening, Mary sat alone on the ridge, John's journal open in her lap. She'd read his entries so many times the pages were soft at the edges. His words about resilience had become her mantra. "The mountain breaks before it builds. Trust the process." She looked down at the lights of Pine Hollow, no longer feeling the sting of rejection. The town that had auctioned her off for $2 now existed in her shadow. The mountain had indeed shaped her into something unbreakable, not by hardening her heart, but by revealing its true strength. As darkness fell, Mary traced the outline of her newest wooden figure, not of herself this time, but of the mountain that had saved her. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Mary Johnson faced her mother across the polished oak divide. 3 years had passed since she'd climbed that mountain, yet the wounds still felt fresh whenever she looked into those familiar eyes. Eyes that had watched her be auctioned away for $2. Her mother had launched a calculated media campaign, appearing on daytime talk shows with rehearsed tears, claiming she'd been coerced into signing the release form, that she'd searched tirelessly for her daughter. "I just want my baby back," she'd sobbed into microphones, wearing clothes nicer than any Mary had seen in their home. Susan Martin sat beside Mary, her hand occasionally squeezing the young woman's arm in silent support. The councilwoman had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could fully steel her against the practiced performance unfolding before them. "Your Honor," her mother pleaded, "I made a terrible mistake. I was desperate, struggling with bills. I never thought they'd actually take her away." When Mary's turn came to speak, she rose slowly, her legs steady beneath her. At 19, she stood taller than when she'd left Pine Hollow, not just in height, but in presence. "The woman sitting there," Mary began, her voice clear despite the tremor in her hands, "sold me for less than the cost of a coffee. She signed that form knowing exactly what would happen. When I lived under her roof, I went hungry while she bought cigarettes. I slept cold while she brought strangers home." The courtroom fell silent as Mary continued. "The Mountain Project has helped dozens of girls find their strength. I've built something meaningful from the ashes of what she did to me. I'm not her property to reclaim when it's convenient." The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, studied the documents before her. Medical records showing Mary's malnourishment before John Davis took her in. School reports noting unexplained absences. The original auction paperwork with her mother's signature, obtained during Susan's investigation. "The court finds no compelling reason to disrupt the current guardianship arrangement," the judge announced. "Ms. Johnson has demonstrated remarkable resilience and maturity. The petition is denied." Her mother's face contorted with rage, the mask of maternal concern slipping away. As bailiffs escorted her out, she hurled accusations that Mary had been brainwashed, that the mountain man had corrupted her. But Mary remained standing, her gaze unwavering. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, their cameras capturing the moment Pine Hollow's darkest tradition was finally irrevocably condemned in the public eye. That night, back at the retreat, Mary carved a new wooden figure, not of herself this time, but of the courtroom where she'd finally spoken her complete truth. A decade had passed since Mary Johnson first climbed the mountain. A frightened 16-year-old sold for $2. Now the mountain project stood as a testament to transformation. Its wooden buildings nestled among the pines like they'd always belonged there. Each spring Mary carved two new figures, one depicting the girl she'd been, shoulders hunched and eyes downcast, and another showing the woman she was becoming, spine straight and gaze unwavering. These wooden portraits lined the walls of what had once been John's secret room, now transformed into a sanctuary where each girl could see her journey reflected. "This is my 10th year," Mary told a group of newcomers, her fingers tracing the grain of cedar wood. "Each mark represents something I've overcome." The retreat had grown beyond what anyone could have imagined. Girls arrived from across West Virginia and neighboring states, many referred by Susan Martin, who had expanded her advocacy work beyond Pine Hollow. The councilwoman had become a fierce champion for vulnerable youth, using Mary's story to change legislation across the state. Michael Brown often returned to help, his own healing evident in the easy way he now moved through the world. He'd found his sister 3 years prior, and she too had joined their growing community, teaching others to identify edible plants and build shelters. In quiet moments, Mary would retreat to her cabin and open John's journal. Its pages had yellowed, but his sketches and observations remained a source of strength. She'd visited him in prison twice yearly until his release, and though he declined her invitation to return to the mountain, his teachings lived on in every aspect of the program. "The mountain doesn't make you stronger," she would tell new arrivals, echoing John's words. "It simply shows you the strength you've always had." The wooden figures now numbered in the hundreds, girls who had arrived broken and left whole, each carving a testament to their resilience. Some returned as mentors, others sent letters from college dormitories and first apartments. A few, like Mary, had stayed, building lives among the trees that had sheltered them. On clear nights, Mary would climb to the ridge above the retreat and look down at the lights glowing among the trees. She could see Pine Hollow in the distance, a town slowly reckoning with its past. The auction grounds had been converted into a community garden, the stage dismantled board by board. John's journal entry from the day he'd bid on her remained her favorite. $2 to save a life, he'd written. "The best investment I've ever made." The auction that had once been Pine Hollow's shameful tradition was now a distant memory, replaced by something far more powerful. What had begun as a cruel joke, a girl sold for $2, had transformed into a movement that reached beyond the Appalachian Mountains, touching lives across West Virginia and beyond. Mary Johnson, once the unwanted teenager with downcast eyes, now stood tall at 32, her presence commanding respect as she addressed the summer gathering at the Mountain Project. The fortress that had once been her prison and then her sanctuary now housed dozens of girls each season, each with stories of abandonment or abuse etched into their spirits. "The mountain doesn't care who you were before," she told the circle of young women seated around the evening fire. "It only cares who you choose to become." Her words carried the weight of experience, of a journey from shame to strength that had become almost mythical in these hills. Behind her, Susan Martin nodded approvingly. The former councilwoman had retired from politics but remained the Mountain Project's fiercest advocate, securing funding and fighting legal battles when necessary. Their partnership had weathered 16 years of challenges, building something neither could have imagined that day in the courthouse. Michael Brown, now the retreat's wilderness guide, distributed blocks of cedar wood to each girl. His hands, once trembling with fear when he'd stumbled into this same clearing, moved with practiced confidence. He had found his sister years ago. She now ran a similar program in Kentucky, but had chosen to stay, understanding better than most the healing power of these mountains. "Every carving tells two stories," Mary explained, demonstrating with her knife. "Who you were and who you're becoming." The firelight caught the collection of wooden figures arranged on shelves inside the main hall, hundreds now, each one a testament to transformation. John Davis's journal sat on Mary's desk, its pages worn from years of reference. Though he had passed 5 winters ago after his release, his wisdom lived on in the program's foundation. The hermit who had once been feared now had a memorial stone near the summit trail, visited by those who understood his complicated legacy. As darkness settled over the pines, The girls began to carve, their faces intent with concentration. Mary watched them, remembering her own first tentative cuts into the wood. From the ridge, the lights of Pine Hollow twinkled in the distance, no longer a place of nightmares but simply a town coming to terms with its past. Each year, beneath these ancient trees, new stories took shape in wood and flesh. The mountain that had once hidden Mary's shame now stood as proof that even in the harshest places, transformation was possible, and hope could grow from the smallest seed, even one worth just $2.